Hello there, it is a Tuesday, which means it's time for another in real life video. This week, we are sort of back on track, accepting more questions, or not so much accepting, because we kind of always accept them, but answering more questions from our ever-growing list. And as per usual, you can submit your own if you want. Helps if you include a question mark. And like I said, I'll add it to the ever-growing list. Obviously, if it's a little too personal or something private or breaks terms of service in some way or another, can't answer it. But otherwise, have at it. Anyway, this week's question comes from a gentle viewer whose username should be somewhere in the lower third of the screen right about now. And let me bring it up here. Let's see. All right. They ask, how do you feel about the Elder Scrolls 6 taking a more nuanced route when it comes to encounters? Similar to Starfield and sometimes in Fallout, where you can talk your way out of most situations with most characters. That is a fairly simple question that actually, I think has more depth to it than you would think, right? So on sort of, just from the get-go, it would be cool, right? On a broad scale, it would be cool, but it's not necessary, right? If anything, I would be in some ways concerned that you run the risk of writing the game that way. You run the risk of giving too much focus to that system, to like branching dialogue, which I guess is at sort of the root of something like that, wherein you can talk your way out of situations, right? Or sort of, use diplomacy in some way. I presume you would also have like various skill checks, right? Like it would be saying like, oh, do you have your conjuration at level 50, then you get this dialogue option available. Oh, do you have your acrobatics at this level, then maybe this person will talk to you slightly differently, right? They'll unlock a hidden bit of dialogue to say to you. I assume that's what we're referring to and what would sort of be encompassed in this hypothetical scenario, this situation. That is all well and good. Right, that's all well and good. True enough, Starfield does some of this. Fallout 3 did some of it. Fallout 4 doesn't do much of it. It did do a bit of it in Far Harbor, and I think Nuka World to a lesser degree. But Fallout 4, I think, only has like a handful of it in the core game, wherein there's some sort of skill check through like a dialogue menu or through conversation, right? Through sort of like a prompt that appears. I think when you're dealing with the sailing ship, the USS Constitution, there is one there too. Maybe a few actually. But regardless, certainly not exactly something that is commonly seen in the Elder Scrolls, right? Not something that really showed up at all in the core games of any of the Elder Scrolls games that I've played. And I presume dating back to Daggerfall and Arena, right? Not really in Morrowind, not really in Oblivion, not really in Skyrim. There are a few instances of stuff like that, wherein like, if you have high enough strength or whatever, your attribute is high enough, maybe you can get something to work out that way. Thus, because of that, I would say it's not really foundational to the sort of Elder Scrolls experience, right? It could be, right? In an ideal world, they add that in, and it is yet another system at play in the world, right? Imagine you have a whole bunch of different quest arcs and side quests, and right? And as per usual, you would anticipate some will be hits, some will be misses. It would be great if there were ones where there was that degree of reactivity, where you could have that amount of player agency, where it did sort of take into account your skills and whatnot. The difficult thing about it is sort of your ability to just continually keep progressing, which, make no mistake, yeah, that is also the case in Starfield, right? And I think maybe it's worthwhile to just give it to the player. Something that I think would also be useful would be sort of reactivity to your own choices, right? Like Starfield does this as well. I think maybe the best example of this is New Vegas, right? Which uses BGS's engine at the time. But of course, written by a different team and designed by a different team, which had a very different ethos, which had, I don't know, very different foundational ideas behind what they were doing, right? With New Vegas, we're talking about Obsidian, right? And a much more narratively focused game, and a much more narratively focused team, which produced a much more narratively focused game, right? I would say New Vegas is actually less of the BGS sort of immersive sim, like sandbox role-playing game, and far closer to that of like a branching narrative game, like a branching narrative role-playing game. The exploration and stuff and the systems in it, they exist, but mostly as a result of using sort of the groundwork put in by Fallout 3, right? Which, you know, the direct predecessor and the exact previous game to use that engine. But true enough, a lot of people will remark, if they enjoyed Fallout 3 or 4 for its exploration and for its sort of systems and stuff like that, sort of the open world systems, a sandbox experience, some people legitimately go to New Vegas and they kind of bounce off of it because it doesn't have as much depth to its sandbox experience, right? But I think most people, if you understand that this is Fallout New Vegas, this is a spin-off, this is made by a different team, you adequately would have adjusted your expectations ahead of time. And I think a lot of people do have that preference for it as well, because there is a precedence for Fallout 1 and 2, classic Fallout, sort of having that sort of narrative role-playing game experience rather than a sandbox, immersive, simi-like role-playing game experience, which we get in Fallout 4. So, like I said, there's a foundation that they're sort of building on top of, which, like I said, I think makes it difficult with Elder Scrolls because it kind of doesn't have that foundation, right? Branching dialogue, skill checks and stuff, it's not foundational to the Elder Scrolls experience. The sandbox experience absolutely is it. You sort of anticipate in that game, in those games, a lot of unique dungeons, a lot of exploring. Every like 5 to 10 minutes or so, you find a new dungeon that has something interesting in it to some varying degree. There's quest arcs coming at you from every end. It's fun to go through the world and sort of level up your skills, experiment around with different combinations and stuff. You know, you can be a sword and board warrior, but what if you also had a sword and board plus magic, right? And what kind of magic? There's so many different kinds. How would you use it with your sword and board abilities, right? This is, in large part, why a lot of people enjoyed the spellcrafting systems and sort of the more, the spell systems of prior games, prior to Skyrim, that had more breadth to them. They just, whether or not there was more depth, I think is up for debate, especially when it comes to Morrowind, where the game is so easy that it kind of doesn't really matter, the whatever depth is there. But there is certainly a plethora of choices that you can make. There's so many tools at your disposal, so many toys to play around with in the sandbox. So like I said, this kind of skill check, branching dialogue system, being able to talk your way out of stuff, that's nice. That's really good. It could serve as like yet another sort of like tool or something within that world, another part to add on to the sandbox experience. But I don't think it should be at like the core of it unless you're deliberately going out of your way to sort of make, like, I don't know, remake the image, remake the image of the Elder Scrolls games. I think a lot of people are anticipating that Elder Scrolls 6 will have that same sort of sandbox experience, right? I think that's how you sort of work toward fulfilling or meeting or attempting to meet the expectations that people have for Elder Scrolls 6 is to continue laying into the sandbox experience and having other things build on top of it. You don't want to build up like this strong narrative role-playing game situation wherein it detracts from the sandbox experience. The sandbox experience should, of course, be at the forefront of it because this is kind of what these games have always been known for. And as well, this is very obviously sort of like the main skill of this development studio is creating a sandbox role-playing game. But like I said, that shouldn't be reason to sort of shy away from the opportunity of attempting that, just so long as you aren't sacrificing this, what is foundational for a new experiment, right? Which I think in some ways this is like the criticism levied at Starfield in some ways, right? But when it comes to Elder Scrolls 6, I think that's the end all be all. Is it would be nice to have that stuff, but it's not necessary, right? This isn't going to make or break Elder Scrolls 6 for me. It would be like a lack of interesting exploration. You know, you sort of at this point expect there to be a lot of handcrafted bespoke dungeons and like little areas and little nooks and crannies where you can find little knickknacks, little notes and messages, and perhaps build upon the pre-existing world building stuff that kind of connects to little tidbits that you can hear in town, right? Maybe you go in town and you hear like, oh, someone was missing or whatever, and then you go to a cave somewhere that you don't even have a formal quest to do it, but you go to like a cave or whatever in a nearby woodland area and you find, oh, there's a note here from someone. Oh, this is the person who went missing in that nearby town. And there's no formal quest or anything, but you know, it's sort of that sandbox experience. It builds on top of this. It's not even crucial world building, but just, you know, incidental world building for this one specific town. That's sort of the thing that people live and breathe when it comes to Elder Scrolls games. That's sort of like integral to the experience. And like I said, I think that's how you sort of hope to meet expectations. There's a lot of talk about, we don't know. We think it's impossible for Elder Scrolls 6 to meet the expectations of fans, which I think is fair enough. That's a totally fair thing to say because, you know, it's been so long. The longer you go without making a new entry, a lot of people won't understand that you're also the same team that is producing like Fallout or producing Starfield or something like that. There is an expectation that this one is going to be one heck of a banger, right? But yeah, I think that's how you do it. You should just lean into the sandbox stuff. And if there's opportunity for more, go for it, right? Go for it. Just don't let it get in the way of what you already sort of do, right? I think a great example of that would be how they handled Far Harbor, right? They certainly did some experimentation in there too, by virtue of, what a good example of it going wrong. But thankfully it was fairly short and very much constrained to one area, or the puzzle in Far Harbor, in Fallout 4's Far Harbor. I personally didn't mind it so much, but true enough, it does suck a butt to have to go through it multiple times, especially since Far Harbor itself is such a kind of fun and replayable quest area, right? A lot of the quests, a lot of the missions there have a lot of reactivity and alter differently depending on choices that you make. And there's like significantly different outcomes. But what gets in the way of it is sort of this tedious puzzle segment, which was a bit of an experiment, but thankfully it's really only contained into that one area, right? It's not like you're traveling along the map and you have to solve these puzzles everywhere around the map, like some sort of like Ubisoft style map exploration where it shows up and it's like, oh, here's a tower, and to get to the top of it, we've got one of these Dima puzzles for you to solve, right? Thankfully that didn't happen. That's not how it went, but you can envision a world where sort of you get carried away with something that isn't foundational, right? But I think it's okay to sort of add on more. And even when it does go wrong, it makes for a fun talking point so long as like it going wrong doesn't like overstay its welcome. But yeah, like I said, it's also kind of difficult to do in a game where the sandbox has like no limits, right? Where in Elder Scrolls games, I would assume in Elder Scrolls 6, it will function like the past 3 games, if not more, wherein if you start out the game, using magic, there's no reason like a third or 2/3 of the way through, you can completely pivot your character and then max out like all of your melee stats, right? There's no reason you can't do that. It makes it feel a little less special in that, I've just become like this omnipotent god character that can pass every single skill check, right? That's kind of at odds with sort of that branching dialogue, that sort of like narrative role-playing game staple, wherein you've built out a specific type of character who excels at some things and is bad at other things. And that's sort of the joy of it, is expressing that character's strengths and weaknesses in the world through branching dialogue, through like little skill checks that appear in the world. Like, you walk up to, I don't know, a little device that needs your repair skill or whatever, right? Oh, my character's good at repairing. It becomes less special, I feel, if you're just good at everything, right? I've come to dislike, in Fallout games specifically, Fallout 3, and looking forward to the New Vegas replay, I've come to dislike putting points into intelligence because it kind of makes you just like good at everything, right? I kind of like specializing. I kind of enjoy failing a skill check and seeing where that takes me. As well, you can see it in currently going on our Baldur's Gate 3 playthrough, right? Wherein it's nice to specialize in something and see like, maybe I'm not doing too well in this regard, but oh my gosh, this kind of check, I know I'm always good at it, so even really hard versions of this check, I'm going to probably pass it with flying colors. Whereas this other one, it's a little iffy, we'll roll the dice or whatever, right? Very much enjoy that. Like I said, they're integral to different things, different sort of archetypes, different role-playing game archetypes. So, to reiterate, nice if it's there, but not instrumental to its success, right? What would be building out more of the sandbox experience, which, like I said, this can be part of that. More dialogue, more sort of checks and stuff, that can become a part, like another toy to play with within that sandbox. But I don't think it's necessary. And like I said, there's no precedent for it. There's no background for it, especially in recent memory. Dating back to at least Morrowind, there's no major precedent for it outside of like custom mods and stuff like that. Like obviously Fallout 100% has a precedent for skill checks and stuff like that, right? So it works better there, but Elder Scrolls totally doesn't. Elder Scrolls is so much more about like player freedom within a sandbox. That's sort of the foundation of it, right? But I don't know, that said, Elder Scrolls is so much of an open sandbox. At a certain point, you could even question like what is integral to the experience, because like a lot of people sort of make their own experience, right? So for some people, maybe they really would want that, but I feel as if that, like I said, prioritizing that is probably not a good idea, but rather, making it secondary. Making it ancillary to the rest of what's going on, right? Hopefully that makes sense. Like I said, nothing wrong with it, just it's not foundational to it. All right. I think that's everything I want to talk about with regards to this. Like I said at the start, feel free to submit further questions. Always taking them, always adding more onto our list. That ought to do it, I think. All right. Until next time, please take care of each other.